Hello, and welcome to the Product Meets Bio podcast. I am Vicky Lee Hurst,
And I'm Jesse Johnson.
and on this podcast, we explore what it takes to build successful software products in biotech.
Yeah, so we did a pilot episode about a month ago on your podcast, Vicky, but this is going to be the first real episode. And so maybe we should start by talking a little bit about why we wanted to start this podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Go for it.
Yeah, so the reason was we've noticed that there are unique challenges when it comes to building software, specifically in biotech compared to more general tech product management.
Absolutely. And just there aren't a lot of resources that address this specifically. So we wanted to create a community and bring people together to better solve these challenges.
Yeah, so whether you're a founder, CEO, product manager, director of bioinformatics, or just someone interested in the biotech space, we hope that this podcast will be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Let's get started and dive into the world where product meets bio.
Yeah, so today we decided to start off, we talk about finding product market fit, talking about what are some of the kind of common issues and what are things that teams should think about when they're looking into that.
Yeah.
And so maybe let's start off with the issues. And when we were discussing this topic, we came up with a few. I think the first one we were thinking about was going too broad, not wanting to give anything up.
Yeah, yeah. And that's true. Both could be in terms of like functionality, like I want to have all the features that you could possibly need, or it could be in terms of like customer segments, right? Like a lot of products when you talk with people before they find product market fit, they're like, our product can be used by wet lab scientists, by bioinformaticians, by data science, by software engineers, which is great and awesome. But it probably is too broad as a product who hasn't found its product market fit yet.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a saying or not, but if you're building for everyone, you're building for no one, right? And especially like if you think about if you're going to buy something and it's like a wizard doodad that does everything, slices, dices, chops, whatever, versus the thing that does that one thing that you really are looking for, you're gonna be biased towards that thing that does the one thing that you're looking for because you're going to assume that it does that better. And so if you're building software, you kind of want to expect your buyers, your customers, your users to feel the same way.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really well said. And I think another common issue here is in terms of like companies not really recognizing their messages to the customers and to the users oftentimes should be different. And what we mean by like customers versus users is like the people who are writing the check are your customers, right? If you're developing a tool for the bioinformaticians, the individual bioinformaticians may see the value, but if their directors are not seeing the value, it's hard for them, right, to pay for your product.
Yeah, absolutely. And and obviously, like if you're very engineering focused, you're, which a lot of the folks starting these startup companies are, you're thinking about the pain that the user is experiencing, and those are the folks you want to help. And I think that's important, especially, when you're developing the product. But when it's time to actually, drive adoption, sell it, then you suddenly realize that like just because the users love it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be able to convince the people who, as you said, write the checks, them to adopt it. It may not even mean that they're willing to make that effort, because sometimes they just kind of like they've got other things to worry about. They don't want to rock the boat. And so it's very difficult to kind of, especially in biotech, to kind of do what's sometimes called product led, get the users to push for adoption as opposed to getting the person, the actual decision makers on board.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of like the users needing to put in the extra like time and effort to like convince their bosses, managers, whatever, to like actually buy it. Like that's a lot of extra work. They may not be the top of their priority list, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's spending political capital, social capital.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And then I think the third big issue that we had identified was going too long without trying to get feedback.
This is one of my favorites. Yeah. This is I cannot tell you how many times I have been in conversations with especially like earlier stage founders and Oftentimes we're like, we're just trying to build this, and after the initial year, we're gonna start getting some feedback, and it's like all the red flags, right? Like go
Hmm.
off. Like, well, we this should be like this can't be like, oh, we finished one thing. This is not a linear thing, right? We finish development and we get feedback. Like that's not gonna work. It has to be in tandem, and the feedback piece may need to start before you write any code.
Hmm.
And here, what we're talking about feedback is not just like, do you think this is cool? Like, oh yeah, you developed something really cool. We're talking about like really unbiased, really honest feedback here that's going to help us build useful and usable products.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of like art and science and best practices in terms of how we get that feedback, who do we get it from, and how we synthesize that. We can talk all about that later.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of nuances to that. Yeah, well, I think that's probably one of the big, the meatiest topic for us to dig into.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, maybe let's maybe when we as we sort of start to get deeper into some of these things, maybe that's the one that we should start with. Kind of because I think it's really interesting the way that everyone knows that they need to get feedback. Both in terms of like product, or software development in general, but more broadly. And yet, I think a lot of people, myself included, don't do it nearly as much as we should, right? And there's a lot of
Mm.
reasons for that. Like, uh, yeah. So I mean, I'm curious, like, what do you see as the biggest reasons that like folks don't seek feedback?
I think time is a big part,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yeah, it
it
takes
takes a
effort.
lot of time to like sit down with like your users, and especially if you're a smaller startup, you just don't have a lot of that time to do it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes like the the role of a product manager, whether it's by title or just like someone's wearing that hat, um, a big part of it is like bringing these like context to your engineering team, and part of that context involves like customer feedback, right? And I
Hmm.
think a lot of the earlier startups, like there isn't like a dedicated product manager in that role. So this ends up being like one of the things that fall through the cracks really easily because there are more other like burning issues that's on someone else's plate.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, especially in like when you're on a software development team that's sort of its own company versus like an internal team where you don't have those readily available users that you can bounce ideas off of, it can actually take a fair
Right.
amount of effort to find, whether you call them design partners or whatever they are,
Yep.
people that you can bounce ideas off of. I know there's also often a reluctance to kind of show an early product to someone
Mm,
that you want to, like,
absolutely.
you're worried that they're going to kind of anchor on like the early kind of not so good version of it, and then you'll never be able to win their trust back, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I think you really like, there's not much to do about that other than just kind of getting over that idea and recognizing that like the feedback that you'll get from showing them a less than perfect product is going to be much more valuable than what you potentially lose by you know them saying like, oh, I'm not going to bother with this anymore, especially if
Mm,
you frame it right and saying like, I know this is not good, but
exactly.
like give me feedback on it anyway.
Yep,
um,
yep, yeah. I
yeah.
think that's a really big part, like how you frame it, how you set the expectation with your
Mhm.
potential customers and users, and especially if you're building like a software product, right? I think there is a place to not show like the actual product if your goal is just getting that feedback. Like you can set really clear expectations using some kind of Figma
Mhm.
screens to show what you're trying to build, and you can make that really pretty.
Right.
But
Yeah.
like that may help you overcome some of these
Mhm.
like fears that would
Yeah.
prevent you from getting really valuable feedback that changes your product direction and strategy.
Yeah, or you can make it really ugly on purpose,
Yeah,
because
sure.
sometimes
Draw
like
it.
you get better feedback if,
Yeah.
right, because sometimes when people see a really nice clean product, they're reluctant to give you significant feedback because they
Hmm.
say like, oh, you've put a lot of effort into this. I don't want to mess it up, right? So if you
Hmm.
make it
Hmm.
ugly, you're much more likely to get honest feedback.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think these are just like a couple of like the common issues that we see. Obviously there's a lot more,
Hmm.
but for today, like we want to talk a little bit about like how we go about finding product market fit. What are some considerations we think about?
Hmm.
And we're gonna go into details, but I just want to like preface by saying like the goal here is really to figure out what is that like burning issue that you're solving for whom, right?
Hmm.
Like answering that question, is gonna be so important in how you're developing your product, how you are messaging your product, right? um I think that's like the thing, like I want people to like start thinking about. And then there's like a lot more that comes after that in terms of like what are alternatives out there, um what, like, why are we best positioned to help people with our software, what makes us special, right?
Hmm.
How do we get this product to the market in a sustainable way? How do we measure success or, you know, make money from this product? And then like what is the solution requirements on the engineering side, right? All of these, like, we need to figure that out, and that is part of finding your product market fit. So yeah, so I want to preface that, and there is like a couple considerations that we should definitely go into today.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, well, where should we start on that?
We already started chatting about this, like getting customer feedback. Maybe we talk a little bit more about that, just like getting insights from these like users, customers, pain points, and what we do with that.
Sure. Yeah. So one thing, actually, I want to kind of come back to, because we talked about kind of getting honest feedback, right? Whether
Mm,
you do that by making a nicer mock or a less nice mock, and ways of doing that. I think one other trap that people fall into is that there's this kind of very strong social pressure for people to give positive feedback, and and if something like they really want to tell you that they like your idea and that it's going to work, right? And I think it's very easy to kind of hear all that positive feedback and say, oh great, I've got this good idea, I'm just going to like invest everything, put all my
mhm,
eggs in that basket. When in fact, like you're like, no matter like, you're likely to get that feedback even if your idea isn't so great, right? And
mhm,
often people will be reluctant, especially in those early kind of like, I'm just showing you a mock-up conversations. People are going to be reluctant to tell you all the reason that they actually wouldn't buy it, right?
mhm.
And so I've definitely like talked to teams, worked with teams where they went out, they had an idea, they got all this positive feedback, and then when it came time to you know to actually like sell it, they went back to those same potential users, and they said, well, actually, you know what, like, here's 3 reasons why we can't actually do this.
Yep.
And and of course, by at that point it was kind of too late. But
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, I think
So
that's absolutely true. Like asking people, "Do you like it?" versus like, "Would you pay for it?"
right.
Like that's
Yeah.
very different. Like that kind of calculation goes into my head.
Right.
Anybody's head will be very different.
Yeah, or asking them, I think asking them in ways that make it easier for them to say no, right? Like
Right.
saying like, what are 3 reasons why you wouldn't adopt this,
Yep.
right? Like,
Yep.
what would your manager say if you brought this to them?
Yep.
Because then they're more likely to actually be thinking like about those negatives of like, what are the issues going to be? And the kind of the social pressure is more for them to give you all the negatives because you're asking for them, and it would be rude for them to say, oh no, there's no reasons, I wouldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
um,
Yep. Yep. Great. Okay. So then assume that we got some unbiased feedback. There's more to it. Now you got some feedback, say like one user wants you to add this functionality and you're like, this is great, it takes me 2 weeks, easy, add it. Like, is that the right thing? Is that what we should
right.
do?
Yeah, right. And so yeah, so now and now we get into kind of the difference between the buyer and the user, and the what's right for your team, your company that's building the software, versus what's right for users.
Yep.
And so now when you get to into these kinds of prioritization problems, now there's a lot of different considerations besides just like sometimes what the user asks for isn't actually the best thing for you to work on today.
Exactly. Well, and also I think sometimes when the user asks for, there's like an underlying, like a root cause of underlying issue, underlying problem they're trying to solve, right? When they want this feature, they maybe are trying to use the result and feed into their other pipeline and to be able to
Mhm.
do that. But once you understand that bigger picture, you may have a different solution. So like here, what I often say is like, when you get user feedback, don't act on their solution.
Mhm.
They don't know how to build this software better than you do, right? That's
Right.
not their job. Act on their problem, right? Like
Mhm.
really figure out like what that problem is. It's like you have to peel many layers sometimes to figure that out. Like a simple example is like when people are like, "Oh, this button is kind of awkward here. Can you move it to the side?"
Hmm.
And it's really easy to move. There's like a couple lines of code, but like, why would you want it to be moved there? Tell me how you would use this. And maybe they're like, we just don't use this button. Like this doesn't do anything for us. We have a separate tool to do this. It just gets in the way. And
Right.
then maybe that is an opportunity for you to figure out like how should our product integrate with their other tool, right? Like you're really getting into like what is the problem the user is trying to solve rather than what does the UI what is the UI they want or what is the color scheme they want, right? So I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of art and science goes into like user research, user feedback analysis, and once you get that, like you're right, like once you get those feedback, like how do you prioritize that, right? Maybe you're getting 10 different directions for your business. Like how do you prioritize that helps the users but also align with your business goals?
Yeah.
That
So
is,
like,
yeah,
yeah, so like having this sense of curiosity of like not
right.
just doing the thing they ask for, but really trying to understand why, right? Because I mean, like to your point, like I think it's very common when people go to ask for help, right? They usually go two or three steps into what a solution to their problem looks like, and then they ask you for help on the solution, and you have to kind of like you have to push to get back to the original problem, and
Yep.
you know, and so maybe the solution isn't to move the button, it's to remove the button entirely, or it's to create a new module that does the thing that you know that the they have something anyways that there's right the solution is often going to be very different from the thing they ask for.
It's really like I think everybody understands this on like a principle level, but it's really hard to practice,
Hmm.
especially if you are in the like the details. Like if you're an engineer or you're a comp bio, like you're in the details. If people tell you something and you know it's gonna be really quick and easy to do, you're gonna do it.
Right, or fun,
So, huh? And they're fun. Yeah,
or
yeah,
fun, yeah,
exactly,
right.
exactly. Like that kind of technical challenge excites a lot of people,
Hmm.
right? But I think the most important thing here, perhaps, is like actually pausing, like that I view as like the job description of a product manager, like actually pausing, figuring out the context, and bringing that context to the team.
Hmm.
It's hard, and that's why people need like a dedicated person to do that because like the 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 nitty gritty and the details in the code and the bigger context are the two sides of the same coin that you should know. And but it's really hard to hold both sides in your head at the same time. I think you and I have both been engineers in past roles, and I have been in product managers in past roles. Like I know firsthand how hard that really is.
Absolutely, yeah. Right. And so that's on the like how you solve the problem. I guess the next one is prioritizing the problem, right?
Yep.
Because if you have a dozen customers and each customer is asking for a different feature or or they're trying to solve a different problem, right? Then you have to like if you solve every problem that your customers come to you with, then you're just going to have this sprawl of different features and different,
You're a
modules
feature
and maintaining
factory.
that,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, that may actually be less compelling as a solution for future customers because again they see this kind of like buffet of different options and they say, well, I'd rather have the tool that solves my one problem versus this kind of Swiss Army knife
Yep.
that solves everything.
Yep.
Yeah. So how do you think about like how, when you're like when it comes down to it, if you have like half a dozen different kind of directions that you could go in based on user requests and based on kind of internal brainstorming, like what are the things that you think about when you're evaluating those, prioritizing those?
Uh huh. We went a lot more in depth in this in our first episode, in our
Oh, that's true.
previous
Yeah. So I
episode,
guess we, yeah.
on the prioritization. But I think there's so a framework we talked about in that episode. People can feel free to listen to that. But I think like on a high level, like you're just these requests and features should be connecting to your business goals and to be connecting to like users' pain points, right?
Mhm.
So in those are the two biggest dimensions you should be considering as you are rating these and like calculating these. And a big part is also like using what we discussed in that first episode to like bring alignment across the your internal teams, figuring out like how do people view these differently. Like engineers are likely going to give you a better estimation on their effort part, which is a big consideration when it comes to prioritization. But like your business development team can give you maybe a little bit more information around the business side, right? Like whatever that looks like. A lot of this is like aligning internally, seeing these different perspectives, finding out what our blind spots are, and then using this as a way to prioritize.
Yeah. So maybe instead of, so I think that's a great point. We talked about that last time. So maybe instead the question should be, how do you decide like what your focus should be, like given all those different directions, if you want to decide like what's the thing that is going to make you special and unique, like
This is a little bit abstract, right? I think
yeah.
if you're deliberating on this for long enough, you should probably consider like, let's develop a hypothesis. Like I'm really big into product hypothesis here, and I think a lot of our audience here, even if you're not in product, you're in science.
Hmm.
Developing a hypothesis, figuring out what is the smallest experiment that you can run that's cheapest, quickest. Run that experiment, come back to your hypothesis, adjust, and like just quickly move forward. Sometimes maybe in front of you there are 5 different options. You don't know which one is going to work. Just run really small experiments. Like that
Hmm.
is kind of the core of product discovery work, right? You're not just picking something randomly or doing it because someone told you to, but you're doing these more like a scientific approach to
Yeah,
run
right.
small experiments, figuring out what the results is, measure that outcome,
Hmm.
and then figure out how you should adjust. What are some of the lessons you learn, and move on to the next thing, given all that insights. So yeah, so I think you should prioritize, and when you cannot, like figure out the small experiments that you can run, and then iterate.
Well, and when you're thinking about experiments, you're thinking about like making a mock-up, showing it to
It could
customers,
be
or
that,
showing
yeah.
it to potential users,
That's certainly cheaper than like deploying anything, right? So like
right?
that is like one example of what that may look like.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Oh, I see. So you're thinking even going as far as like building the
it
actual
could be,
features,
it could
seeing if
be, or
yeah.
like a smaller version of the actual feature.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, yeah, right. Building something simple, see if your actual users adopt it
Yep.
and what they say about it,
what
right?
what I like to see in these, so I usually would ask like a person in the product role, whether that's like head of product or product manager, to write like a one pager on these like experiments. Like, what is your hypothesis? How long is the duration
Hmm.
of your experiment? What does success look like, and what does failure look like? Like, what are some considerations that you have? Making sure that your team has all of this context, and you know when to stop. Right? Like, this
Hmm.
is really really important.
Yeah,
Otherwise, like experiments could be running for 6 months, and that's too late. That's too late.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's usually something I want people to define ahead of time, and then like measure as time goes on.
Got it. Okay, cool. Um, Now, one other aspect that often, or kind of, I mean, it's this sort of adjacent to product market fit, but I think still relevant is kind of the competitive landscape. That is,
Yes.
how do you think about alternatives and how do you think of competitors, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely part of product market fit. Like, if there are other alternatives out there and people don't see the value in yours, like they're not going to switch, or they
Right.
see the value but the activation energy is so high they're not going to switch, right? Like
Yeah, right.
the competitive, right? Like we talked about, like, getting all these insights from your customers, but like you have to look out there, like what other solutions are out there. It may be like a very similar product, or maybe something like so different.
Yeah,
um
that's true. Yeah, I mean, and I see often there's, especially like when it comes to kind of data management, supporting like data science in biotech and computational biology, there's a lot of like emerging categories. And so you see a lot of, pieces of software where they at least feel like a category of one, just because, it's so like such a new space that there just aren't a lot of commercial competitors there. And I know when I talk to teams like that, usually the way and we say like, what's the competitive landscape, and they say, well, oh, we don't have competitors, we're the
mhm,
only one doing this. And I think the key is to understand that it's you're not competing with software that is just like another version of you, right? It's not like you're an ELN competing with another ELN.
mhm,
What you're competing with is whatever your potential users are doing today that you're going to replace, right?
mhm.
And so that may be Excel, that
Yep.
may be, post-it notes,
Exactly.
that may
Yep.
be, right. I mean, like it doesn't have to be software. It doesn't have to be, and it may be a piece of software that looks very different, but where they're getting the same value from it, the same functionality from it.
Yep.
And so, yeah, so whenever I think about competitive landscape, I'm not thinking about like software category. That's not what it means. What it means is like functionality, whatever the user is getting done or is going to get done with your software. How are they doing it today?
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think this like you have to really drill down to like what is that problem that users are having, right? Like
Hmm.
the deeper that you go in that direction, the more you're going to figure out like, oh, where does my product fit, right? I think there
Right.
is, it requires a lot of practice in that area. And like when people just say, oh, our software just help people collaborate better, like tell me more. Like you have to go like 5 steps deeper than that, right?
Right, right. Yeah. Well, and yeah, and actually, I mean, and then like that gets into sort of this question of like when you describe it, are there's this idea of like people don't buy a drill because they want a drill, they buy a drill because they want a hole in their wall, right?
Mm,
And when you say like, oh, this helps teams collaborate, you're describing the hole in the wall, right?
mm,
You're describing the thing, right? But there's a lot of different ways to get a hole in your wall, right? There's a drill, there's a jigsaw, there's a sledgehammer, right? And so if you like, I think it's tempting to try to sell the hole in the wall because like that's what people want, that
mm,
gets their attention. But ultimately at some point you have to describe, is it a drill, is it a sledgehammer, is it a
mm,
jigsaw, or whatever else you can use
mm.
to so right, so like there's a lot of software out there that helps with collaboration, communication, right? But the but in some ways you're competing with all of it, but you also you have to be careful about how you
You
communicate
do.
that.
Yeah. And that's why like I think the competitive analysis is helpful, right? Like say
Mhm.
the collaboration tool. Like, okay, like how does it compare to Google Docs? Like
Right.
I use that to collaborate with my people I work with. Like how does
Mhm.
yours differ? Right? Like if you think about like what do you consider as collaboration tools and then how do you differ yourself from them? Like that's a good starting
Mhm.
point to try to narrow down like,
Right.
okay, what is the story that your product tells?
Yeah. Yep. And then it's much easier to say, okay, what's the sort of switching energy like? Why would someone choose to switch or not switch?
Right, right. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Nice. Um, and then and then I think like ultimately like what you want to get is this kind of positioning, right? Like that's really what like product market fit is, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like who's
Well, I think like one more step, maybe
Mhm.
maybe not just like positioning itself, because I think positioning is like how you message your product, right?
Mhm.
Like how you
Right.
position your product, but the way you communicate that to your users, your customers, your investors are likely going to be different.
Hmm.
So I think that also like change like that it's important to keep that dynamic in mind as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so maybe positioning is something we can go into in another podcast that's more on like communicating what you do versus finding the product market fit. Um, are there like from a operational perspective, like when you are trying to help teams, because I know you do a lot of coaching in this space, like when you're trying to help teams um, find product market fit, are there particular like are there particular exercises you go through, particular kind of activities?
I think so. So usually it starts with a conversation, like the questions I asked earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, do you know what is that burning problem you're solving? So I
Mm-hmm.
have a list of questions that I go through, in that both in terms of like what are the competitive advantages of your product, but what else is out there? How do you get people to switch? How you think about that? Just give me a sense of like how far along the team is at.
Yeah.
Um, and the reason why I ask these is like at the end of the day, like product coaching, the goal is to help you figure out like you're not just building a product and you put it out there, right? You're building the right product for your users and for your business. Your business needs
Mm-hmm.
will change as well, and you need to make sure that not only the product not only solves users pain points but also is like aligns with your business goals. So that's why we go through these questions. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes if it feels like the right fit, like there are certain tools that you can bring in with like both the thinking backwards mindset from the customer's perspective, or like design sprints. It really varies based on like,
Mhm.
where I think the tool will help them the most. At the end of the day, the tools need to serve them. So I don't have like a prescription that fits
Sure.
all software
Sure.
companies
That
or
makes sense.
biotech. But at the end of the day, like I think some of these tools could be like facilitating their whole progress and accelerates their progress. That I'll introduce that, I'll modify it
Mhm.
according to like their specific situation. Um, but yeah, so like thinking backwards, design sprints, like setting good outcomes and goals and getting into the habit of measuring them. Like all of these
Mhm.
are good lessons we have learned from tech,
Yeah.
and we're
And
trying to apply these in biotech.
And a design sprint is not the same as like a sprint you would get from like Agile
Oh
Scrum,
yeah,
right?
that's right. Okay, that's good to clarify. You're exactly right. The agile sprint, like you do that regularly. Design sprint is
Right.
like a 1 week 1 week event, 1 week long events, 5 days. And the goal for this is like you do the prototyping and the validation during that time with your entire
Mhm.
team. So
Yeah.
a lot of times, like the people would think like, oh, we're really aligned on this internally. We know what we're building, and then like halfway through the design sprint, they're like, oh, you meant this when you said like this is right. Like people start having these
Yeah.
conversations. Oftentimes, this whole process take companies like months to a year to do. So the goal for the design sprint is like really rapid. Like we're just gonna do this in 1 week. We're gonna try to save some money and time. You like spend so like roughly 5 days. Like you spend a day identifying the problems, and then you like just start sketching. Like doesn't need to be pretty, but like get the point across. And then you develop these like hypothesis that's testable, and you develop the prototypes, and then you finally like on day 5 is all customer interviews, right? You're talking with real people and refine your prototype. So like at the end of it, your team should be really aligned on what they're building, why they're building it,
Mhm.
um, but also they have a lot more confidence than they were a week ago in
And
terms
it
of
sounds like they're probably exhausted,
they're
but
really exhausted. Yeah.
right,
So
which is
like
why you only do it once. But yeah.
when I first did this, it was all in person, so pre-COVID. And then like
Hmm.
during COVID, they also like have these like online sessions that you can do it,
Mm,
and it's like so exhausting. But if you do it right, you can get a lot of value from it.
nice. Cool. Good. Good. Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like there are methods, there are structured approaches to it beyond just the like let's think really hard about this and have a bunch of unstructured conversations. Um, which is probably how I would like left to my own devices would but yeah, I mean it's good to know that that those kind of more structured activities are out there.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Are there
Cool.
anything else we want to discuss on the topic of product market fit?
I think looking at my notes, I think we covered all of it
Yeah.
that I was hoping to get to. So yeah, and yeah, no, I think this is really interesting conversation. Um,
Awesome. Yeah.
yeah,
I think like we said before, we always look for like feedback from from our audience. We want to make this really useful for you. So if you like feel like there's an area in product market fit you want to go deeper, or like another related area in building software and biotech, like do let us know. This
yeah.
is for
Let us
you.
know.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jesse. This was
Thanks,
really
Vicky.
fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun. And I guess we'll figure out some topics for the next few episodes.
Awesome. All right. See ya.